Good evening and welcome to tonight's event. We're here tonight for this virtual West Cork Literary Festival event to talk about this anthology, Women on Nature. Normally at this point, I would be encouraging you all to support Bantry Bookshop and your local bookshop and to rush out and buy copies of it. But I believe it's the hottest ticket in town and it's in great demand and it's been sold out in many, many places. So instead, I would encourage you to order it from your local bookshop. Or from Bantry Bookshop, and hopefully you'll have a copy of it soon. It really is an absolutely wonderful collection. So just before we start tonight's proceedings, I would just like to thank the funders of West Cork Literary Festival, the Arts Council of Ireland, Cork County Council and their Library and Arts Services, Fáilte Ireland and the Creative Europe programme of the European Union, who have supported all the events that we're doing online and hopefully in person this year. Tonight's event is one in a series of online events that we've been doing since the beginning of the year, with more events coming up in June and a full programme of events throughout July that we'll be announcing in the coming days. So do keep an eye on our website, westcorkmusic.ie/LF programme, and you'll see all of the events on there. So this book, Women on Nature, is edited by Katharine Norbury, and Katharine is going to be chairing tonight's event with 4 of the contributors, Sinead Gleason, Katie Holten, Elizabeth Rosemary and Jessica Traynor. Katharine has worked extensively in film and television. She was the Observer's Rising Star in non-fiction in 2015, and her first book, The Fish Ladder, was shortlisted for the 2016 Wainwright Prize and longlisted for the Guardian First Book Award. And Katharine actually came to West Cork Literary Festival with The Fish Ladder in 2015, I believe, and did a wonderful event out on Whiddy Island. So it would be absolutely fabulous to be back there again, but instead here we are on Zoom. But I hope you all have a wonderful time tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm now going to hand you over to Katharine, who will introduce you to tonight's readers.
Thank you so much, Emma. Can you hear me, people? Good. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to the Cork Literary Festival for inviting me back again after these years. It is very strange being in Battersea, London, and not being in Whiddy Island, where our event was interrupted by a chicken. I don't think that's going to happen tonight. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to hear that the book is a hot ticket because no news reaches me here in South London. We have no way of knowing. I think what I'll do is introduce each of the 4 writers and artists here first, and then ask you to talk a little bit about yourselves. So first of all, we have Sinead Gleason, whose essay Constellations won the Non-Fiction Book of the Year at the 2019 Irish Book Awards and the Dalkey Literary Award. It was shortlisted for the Rathbones Folio Prize and the James Tate Black Memorial Prize. She's the author of 4 anthologies of Irish short stories and is working on a novel and is also working an anthology at the moment. Katie Holten is an artist. I believe you are now in New York. She represented Ireland at the 50th Venice Biennale. At the root of her practice, she studies the inextricable relationship between humans and the natural world through excavating hidden histories, ecologies, and stories. Interested in exploring the possibilities for multi-species storytelling, she made a tree alphabet and the book about trees in 2015. She recently made a new Irish tree alphabet in 2020, which we're very happy to have featured in this anthology. Jessica Traynor is a poet, librettist, and creative writing teacher. Her debut collection, Liffey Swim, was shortlisted for the Strong Shine Award. Her second, The Quick, was a 2019 Irish Times Poetry Choice. Awards include the Hennessy New Writer of the Year, the Ireland Share of Poetry Bursary, and the Listowel Poetry Prize. Jess has worked with Katie to create a beautiful adaptation of her poetry into the Irish tree alphabet. And Elizabeth Rosemary writes for children, young adults and adults. Her books include the award-winning 9 Trees trilogy and Caramel Hearts. Recent anthology journal publications include The Elysian, Creative Responses, Reading the Future, Autonomy, Pop Shots, Banshee Terrain, Not Very Quiet, Channel, South Circular and Ropes, She lives in West Cork Island. Congratulations, Elizabeth, for being the only one of us who's actually in West Cork Island at the moment. When Unbound first came to me and asked me if I wanted to make an anthology of women's writing about the natural world, I suspect they thought I would probably commission 15 writers to write 15 essays, and it would just be a few months' work. Very quickly, people started to come to me and say, oh, you know, what are you doing? What is it? And I realized that the thing was much bigger. It should be much bigger than 15 contemporary writers. So actually it goes back 700 years through all the islands of the East Atlantic archipelago and pulls us right up to the present day. One of the things that became apparent early on was this idea of nature, women and nature. I think the word women is complex and difficult and doesn't mean what it meant 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And nature is a word that I really struggle with, and I'll be really interested to know what our panelists here tonight, how they find it. I mean, the dictionary defines it as everything that isn't human. That's quite big. So what we probably haven't got here is a series of people writing about natural history, but we have got a fantastic diversity in other ways. So Sinead, would you, do you want to read a little bit from your piece of anthology, and then we'll hear a little bit from all of you, and then we'll start talking. I think that's the easiest way to go. I'm going to mute myself so that you can.
Sure. I just want to say thank you to Emer for having us all, and also thank you to you, Catherine, for putting together this massive book. I know from personal experience how much work is involved in an anthology, especially one of 100, and they can take a lot of time and energy. So thank you. You've done a really beautiful job, and I've been introduced to people whose work I didn't know and people I didn't know were nature writers. So hats off. Thank you. I'm going to read a little section from a piece called Islanded. It was originally written in 2016, and it was the week of Brexit. I was going somewhere very far away, and it was the week of Brexit, and the news was pretty gloomy and doomy, because as we know, Brexit doesn't just affect the UK, it massively has an impact on Ireland. So I'll just read a little bit of this. I was kind of trying to change my own life a bit as well. It was summer, and the days should have been sun-packed and heat-fueled. Rain as distant as Christmas or the red leaf carpets of autumn. But I knew I couldn't count on that. Not in the remote place I was heading for. Getting to this place in Ireland, a country you can usually drive the length of in single-figure hours, took an entire day. A taxi, train, walk, bus, ferry, and a lift in a grimy van. I was slowly trying to tilt my world to transition into somebody else, a writer maybe. Going to a cut-off place seemed like the way to do it. Physically removing myself from family and work commitments, the chance to escape offered headspace, and I'd waited months for this opportunity. But now that it was finally here, I felt guilty, and if I'm honest, some dread. There would be nothing else to do but write. No hiding from the words, and no instant way back to the mainland. I took the train west to Galway, across the waistline of the country, a belt of flatlands and flooded fields. Towns that bus routes now bypass the motorway, killing off newsagents and drapers in favour of Aldi's and B&Q's on its edges. On the last stretch, light already dwindling, flashes of the Atlantic began to appear. On this coast of Ireland, the rain arrives with angular stealth from Dingle to Donegal, and outside a cafe awaiting the ferry, I sat under an awning, listening to the rattle of raindrops, willing it to be summer. The old bus to the ferry smells stronger of diesel inside than out. Leaving behind roundabouts and traffic lights, the rain rolls in and we crawl through coastal Connemara, places that make me think of the famine or drowned sailors. At Rossaveel Harbour, the Aran Island ferries huddle together. The Inish Earboat is small and unconvincing. I eye it up, along with the rain bulge of clouds and the night starting to fall. We pull out into the Atlantic and waves rear up instantly. Palominos of water galloping towards the boat. The people stayed in their seats, green-cheeked. There are buoys along our path, one shaped like a bell, a klaxon against the swell. But I fix in a specific spot, trying to keep my eyes on it as we dive forward. Eventually, the momentum forces me inside, where it's easier to ignore how vulnerable we are out there on the ocean.
Gosh, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. Can I just ask you before we move on, I think the relationship between place and people in this is fascinating. It's hard for me going back 5 years to Brexit because, you know, I am one of those people who is now islanded. Against my will, I was part of the 52%. And I think the tension and the anxiety of the politics actually runs through along with the deep history, the geological history, and the present weather. How do you see yourself within that constellation?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned within the piece, I'm sort of an island obsessive, I think, and not just because Ireland itself is an island with 503 islands off it, and the fact that we are the buffer against the Atlantic, with next stop America, as Elizabeth said in our chat earlier on, and there is something very remote and inhospitable and difficult to get about that place. You can't leave quickly, and if you go to the Aran Islands, it's literally a nightmare to try and get away. You're reliant on. I went to one of the other islands while I was there, and you can't go but there and back in a day. You just stay over, so it's complicated, and it must be like that for people who live there. But you know, the United Kingdom is an island as well, and yet we both seem to be having very, despite topographical and geological and historical proximities, we're having completely different experiences politically and historically as islands at the moment. So I think in terms of where we find ourselves within them, it's like the idea of nature. It's not a very singular thing, and I think lots of the pieces in this book are not just about a place or about a phenomenon in nature, or just about, they're always about something else, as really good pieces of writing are. They have a multiplicity. So I think within this book I wanted to write about the island because it literally made me, and I'm wary of people who kind of, that mystical idea of running off into the hinterland and getting lost in yourself. I think that romanticism of nature, when there's an awful lot more we have to contend with, with ecology and climate change. But for me, it was, I physically had to remove myself from the routines and the vistas that I see around me here all the time in order to try and push myself towards writing. But I've always gone out. I don't live that far. Dublin is it's between the mountains and the sea. Like I get away into greenness, and I find I get a bit funny and distracted and strange if I don't get out into the air and away from the city. It seems, it's very fundamental, I think. And it's like that in Ireland. Again, you can get everywhere quite easily in some ways, but maybe we'll come back to it, but so much of the folklore of this land is very much rooted in nature and trees. I'm sure Katie will talk about that with her own work. But there's an awful lot of magical and supernatural and elements that are all about stones and rocks and pathways and sight lines and all those things. But yeah, there's probably a lot that we could talk about too.
Yeah, no, I remember applying through and I'll probably pronounce it wrong, the Irish metrical Dinchentials, which are these stories of how the places got their names. How stories of how the land was sort of called into being, which it underpins everything. I noticed quite early on making the anthology, there are a lot of islands. Several people wrote about islands. I began to panic at one point because I had so many islands. But also that relationship between being outside. You talk about being in Dublin and being between the mountains and the sea. It's almost not a book of women writing about nature, but as much as women writing about the experience of being outside. And we can, we'll come back and look at that in a little bit. But yeah, place is so deeply embedded into your piece, into your writing.
And I think place is embedded into all stories. I mean, if you think if you put a load of characters on a stage or in a novel, they have to be somewhere. They have to be in a city or in a cabin in the woods. Or the novel I'm writing now is set in a very remote place and is an island. As I say, I can't get away from the obsession about it. But also in the same way that, if you write an essay, I often say to people who want to write them, what's the container of the story? What can you not get away from? And an island is a container. You can't get away from it. And again, so me going there, I mean, I could have gone somewhere else, but I wanted to go as far away as I could. I wanted to go somewhere I couldn't run away and go, I can't do it. I can't write the words. I wanted to put myself, but I've been to the Aran Islands many times. I was first there as a teenager, and it kind of has a hold on me as a place. You can't just, no matter how much you describe it to people, you can't get across what the Aran Islands is like until you go there. It's not like anywhere else. I do remember actually weirdly at the time posting a little sound clip, and Amy Liptrot, who is in this book, who's from Orkney, listened to the clip and she said, that sounds like the caves in Orkney, the kind of idea of the water going in and out. And she said, it's making me homesick for Orkney listening to the Aran Islands. So I loved that connection, and that she's in the book as well.
Yeah, I was curious about the, I was thinking last weekend, I was at the, there was a festival in Folkestone, because Samuel Beckett had gone to Folkestone and he got married there. And while he was there, he thought about writing Happy Days. Well, he worked on Happy Days while he was there. And of course, in that play, there is no reference whatsoever to any kind of place. But actually, you know, the character starts off, she's waist deep in the sand at the start of the play. And by the second half of the play, she's neck deep in the sand. So there is always that pressing of the environment onto character, even when you manage to strip it down as far as Beckett, there's going to be an impact. Now, I'm going to move to Elizabeth and ask you if you will read. So, Sinead, do you want to, I don't know if you want to mute it or not.
Sure, I will.
We'll be fine. But Elizabeth, you've written a piece which is actually also located the other side of the island, in West Cork, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you want to read a little bit of this piece?
Yeah.
Please.
I'm reading from an essay called An Affinity with Bees. And it's in 6 sections to represent the hexagonal shape of the comb. And I'm going to read section 4. And I'm always giving people the advice of, you know, trust the reader. So I'll let it speak for itself. Despite being much bigger, the queen can be difficult to spot in a hive. So keepers may choose to clip her wings and daub paint on her thorax. These processes are not harmful, but make it easier for her to be found. However, the queen's nature is programmed to escape detection in one of 2 ways. A running queen will use speed and stealth to avoid light, while a hiding queen will remain motionless in comb depressions and spaces between the comb, sidebars, and bottom bars. My mother was a hiding queen. When family, friends, or neighbours called, she would pretend not to be home and hide behind the sofa. She rarely sustained a friendship. I've never figured out whether she was lonely or she preferred things this way, and I don't think she knew either. She was clipped and daubed, and yet no one could find her. Much of my childhood was spent hiding. From the various debt collectors, the Lecky man, the Provident Lords man, the gas man, the TV man, everything was rented and nothing was paid. The estate had a communal key for each meter. Kids would run from house to house, following the trail like a treasure hunt. It meant you could never answer the door to anyone in a shirt, because it wasn't easy to explain why you had enough electricity to last the month, but not a single 50p piece inside the meter. Often, my brother and I would hide in the privet outside our home. We would tip ourselves into the foliage, balancing on the metal pole running through its centre. Mother would come out and yell for us, but we knew from the tone whether to reveal ourselves, and she wouldn't persevere for long. Once we decided to hide for good and run away. We packed a carrier bag each, spent the day walking along the Black Path, a local disused railway line, to some unconsidered destination. But as hunger struck, guilt set in. We'd both seen the prepared pans of veg for a cooked dinner, carrots, turnips, potatoes. It was rare for her to make such effort, so we turned back, steeling ourselves for her fury. But the house was dark, she was still in bed, the veg cold in the pans, and the house reeking of piss and whiskey. She hadn't noticed a thing.
Gosh, that's powerful. Now that piece is called An Affinity with Bees. Do you have an affinity with bees?
That's a really interesting question. Bees land on me all the time. When I'm gardening and things, they constantly land on me. They land, get stuck in my hair. And I've actually been swarmed by bees 4 times. So I'm not sure if that's an affinity or not. But they were definitely the closest thing I could find to try and relate to my family when I was trying to write about family. Because I was writing, my family was extremely dysfunctional family, but also from a very dysfunctional place and time. And it never fit any of the brackets that I met from anybody else, you know. There was 5 siblings, but none of us have ever been in the room all together. We were all in foster care, but at different times, different, you know, single parent, but with an addiction. When I did meet my father, he was Roman. He said pretty much everything that could put you on the periphery and make you not, you know, a 2.4 children regular family. And you know, this was what I was trying to write about, and it took me a lifetime to be able to write about this. And I had to look to nature. That was the only way that I could find a way in to write about my own family, because real families around me didn't match up or make any sense in comparison. So I liked the structure of the bees, you know. I do have the affinity with them landing on me all the time or wanting to sting me. But because of where I grew up, people always have this assumption. I grew up in during Thatcher's Britain. That's how I explain it now. It took me a long time. In Ireland, people always say, you know, where are you from? And that's the hardest question for me to answer, because, you know, I had a lot of homes as a child and lots of different versions of family. So I've come up with Thatcher's Britain. That's what I say now. That's the best I can, you know, explain, because it was a very, you know, specific time. But there's always this like assumption that if you grew up in poverty and difficult times, that you'd have no interest in nature. You know, a few years back when they wanted to remove, was it foxglove and other words from the dictionary, because it said, like, you know, it would have no relevance to children, and particularly seen as more children are urban. It was complete nonsense. You know, we sought out nature because that was a safe space for us where we could be and think and, you know, explore and just, you know, not have to worry. So it was something, it was a place where you could identify. And funnily enough, there was one place we used to always go, because during Thatcher's time, you know, the mines were closed, so the docks were closed, the railways closed, and just one by one, everything was closed. But in all these abandoned spaces, nature grew, you know, there were wildflowers, animals moved in, the children.
The buddleia popped up everywhere, didn't they?
Yeah, and ragwort was everywhere, and we used to collect, you know, we used to collect the caterpillars and things like that, and it just, so it was a really weird mixture of having this very concrete, built up, very violent, very rough area, and then suddenly the places that were abandoned were being taken over by nature, and that's where all us wild kids basically were bringing ourselves up, you know. And yeah, and there was actually one place that was a meadow which had grown over all the disused railway tracks, and it was absolutely full of bees, and that was always our favourite place to be. So I think that was pretty much my starting point.
Yeah, no, again, it's this idea of being outside. I mean, I relate to, well, some of that certainly, because I grew up also in Thatcher's Britain. There is no such thing as society. But also, I think my mum and dad historically had not had a great deal of money, and so all of their early holidays were walking holidays. What they always wanted to do was go camping and walk. And I remember inheriting these heavy A-frame rucksacks that they'd got, I don't know, from the Army and Navy stores, World War II things, absolutely solid. Myself, and beginning walking as a teenager. But then also I do, you know, I grew up in a stable home, but I had been adopted as a child, and that experience of, I used to call it the genetic hum. You know, whenever we had family gatherings, I called it the genetic hum in the room, which would, this buzz that would sort of lift. But that I personally felt, I knew I was apart from it. You know, I remember looking from face to face and just not quite getting it. And there would invariably, at some point, someone would say, it would come up that I was adopted. Maybe because somebody new to the family came and they said, oh, you don't look anything like your brother. And someone could always be relied upon to say, oh, okay, it's adopted. And at that point, the conversation turns to you, and anything you may have wanted to find out from them has gone, because it's like, oh, well, do you know you're real? You know, all those questions that people ask displaced children. And I would always go outside, because outside it was reliable. It was, you know, literally you were grounded. You could put your feet on the ground, you could look up at the sky, and although it changed, it was the same. And it was almost that indifference, that neutral indifference that was so easy to be among.
Yeah, indoors and around people, you always had to navigate mood, you know, mood and violence, and that would be from strangers, that would be other people's families, your own family, and that was a constant. But in the natural world, you know, I learned to grow still in sitting in, you know, abandoned railway tracks and in the pigeon park and random places. Cemeteries featured, because there was no parks, so cemeteries featured highly as well. So yeah, but that's where I learned to grow still, and that's where I learned to I had the time to sit and think about, like, okay, what do I want? What is it I want? How do I go back and deal with what is waiting for me? But also, what do I want and how do I make it different? You know, so it gave me a place to reflect. And like you say, it was was reliable, and it felt safe.
Yeah.
And we spent a lot of time outdoors.
Well, yes, and I did too. I remember coming home, 10 o'clock at night and thinking I'll be in terrible trouble, having kept putting my watch back, and then discovering everybody was still hunched around the crossword and they hadn't even noticed that I'd gone. But actually, I'm going to move now to, now I think, shall I start with Katie to talk about the tree alphabet, and then I'll come to Jess to ask how you interpret the tree alphabet, because Katie, so we unmute you, because Katie has made this fantastic Irish tree alphabet, and in a way is it a version of the Ogham script? I mean, I'm going to let you talk about it really, because you know why and how it came about. But I know, from what little I know of the Ogham script, the object of the exercise may have been to hide it from the Romans, that if we have an alphabet that's based on trees that allowed, I don't know, the old Druids in Wales, they could carry on communicating with one another and the Romans couldn't figure it out. I think that may have been Robert Graves's idea, and it may be all blown to bits, and I'm sure, Katie, you know the truth. So
well, first of all, thanks for having me here in the Zoom room. It's wonderful to meet you all virtually, and for being included in the book as well. It's an honor. It's hard to talk about in a tiny nutshell, but I'll try and be really brief. It sort of goes back, and I should say, I'm speaking of islands, I'm here on the Lenape land and the Mannahatta Island in the East River, and it's on Turtle Island. So there's islands within islands. It's like turtles all the way down. It's islands all the way down. But I always think of, Earth, right? Our whole planet is an island in outer space. So we're all here together, abandoned. So the tree alphabet actually started, I'm here in like I said, Mannahatta. I'm in the West Village. I came here originally for 1 year to do a Fulbright, researching our relationship with nature. And I used the scare quotes and the capital N for nature. And I was like, should I use a capital H for humans? So it was just something I was thinking a lot about. This was back in 2004. I knew, my work was always environmental. It's like who I am, right? I'm a human, but I'm an animal, and my mom is a gardener and works with plants, and the whole cycle is part of my my mental health and my being. But I knew that also that cities are part of that as well. And I think, Kate, you were asking about this word, and I love what you said about the word woman and women. That doesn't mean what it meant 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 100 years ago, 700 years ago. I think that's brilliant, because I was thinking about this, last night when I wasn't sleeping, lying there going, oh, should I say something about this, the fluidity of everything, right? So everything is, what is man, what is woman? We're all, what's a human? We're all, because we realized that our bodies, right, aren't even human. They're more bacterial and microbial than even human. So we're all intermixed and interspecies, and that's where these alphabets that I started making came from, this real sense of we need to think beyond, or I need to think beyond this human skin. And I was just on a plant conference just before hopping off that Zoom to come on this Zoom, and one of the last things, it was Michael Marder, the philosopher, talked about the skin, right? This word Blatt in German, the skin is like a leaf. It does exactly the same thing. Well, I can't quote him, whether he said it's exactly the same thing. Anyway, I'm going way off tangent, but I feel like this should be a whole conference. We should have like 3 days to do this conversation.
We've started with Sinead's fantastic sort of really everything packed into it: politics, history, the past, the future, the present, the islands. And then we've come through, Elizabeth Rose to one story, one species, two places, Bristol and West Cork. The bees are in West Cork. And now we're actually sort of sinking down just to the words themselves, to the language, to actually what is language? How do we sort of get to this quintessence?
Which reminds me that Elizabeth Rose, when you mentioned the words that were disappearing, so the reason I made the very first alphabet, so to try and answer the question, Kate, about the alphabet, the tree alphabet, in 2015, I was turning 40 and I wanted to make a book. My brother John is a writer, but he's also got a publishing house called Broken Dimanche Press in Berlin. And I have 1,000 book ideas. I'm always making books. I love books. But we wanted to make a book together. And I realized that the tree drawings, this goes back to 2004 when I came here on this Fulbright for 1 year, supposedly 1 year research into nature and our relationship with, you know, nature in the city. I started making tree drawings. It was mapping my walks, the city, street trees. I realized that 10 years later, right, in 2014, those tree characters, I saw them, you know, again, as I'm not sleeping, it appeared on a white page. The tree drawings themselves were characters, and that was the text. So it was in an instant. It was like one of those flashes where I realized, the trees are the characters. They type. You can, they germinate. They sprout from the blank page, the blank field, like, you know, in the spring when you have the shoots germinating and popping up. And it was the same thing. It was like language. Growing and alive. And it probably goes back to this frustration I have with, you know, being Irish, very, like, that's what I am. I'm Irish, but I don't have the Irish language. We moved when I was 10 and I never got the chance to learn it. I was listening to Doreen Negrifa's podcast, a great conversation with David Naiman the other day, and she talks a lot about this, well, you could use the word trauma, I guess, of not having it. But the reason I picked up the book is that Rob McFarlane, who collected these, the first sentence is "language is fossil poetry," you know, he quotes Emerson. And so all of this, I think, is wound up together for me, the fact that language and the land and bodies, it's all of a one. And the fact that not having the Irish language is this frustration, you know, because we know that they mean things, right? The words, everything is named. And to, sorry, I could really go on for hours. So I'll try and be super brief. So this was the cover of the book, has the ABC, right? So this was the first tree alphabet. So it was very simple. A is apple, B is beach. Turned the drawings that I made into a font so you could download it. If I share my screen, I might be able to briefly make it obvious. So you could go to the treealphabet.ie website, and then you see this little GIF that I made with each tree. So if that makes sense, each letter of the alphabet, the 26 letters, has its own tree. And you can download, if you click here, you can download the font so you can type away yourself. And there's also a poster, so you can, you know, print it out, stick it up on the wall. I was hoping to have it stuck up here, but it's been so hot and humid, nothing will stick. Can't get anything to stick. But you can also type. So that's A is I'm, B is beach, and C is call for hazel. Then on my website, which is just keithholton.com, you've got the more info. The whole project grew out of a show I was having for Visual Carlo, which was this time last year. It was last summer. So it was all, the Irish tree alphabet was made during lockdown. But so this, you know, the first tree alphabet was made in 2015 to celebrate the 40 years of me on planet Earth. And I wanted to encapsulate, there were like 50 contributors and 50 texts. And the idea was, it's not about me, it's not about trees, it's about all of us together, and the tangents and the stories. What is it to be a human on planet Earth at this time? Because I think this deep time thinking for me is really important, that we're in the Anthropocene. Our species has changed every biological aspect of the planet. We're in a climate emergency. And we really do need new ways of thinking and seeing and relating with the world around us. Nature, Michelle Neuhaus has just published a book, Beloved Beasts, and she just had an essay a few days ago where she said that word nature should actually just be, she didn't say blown up to smithereens, but basically we should just dump it, maybe not use the word at all. And, you know, she's not the first to say this.
No, well,
but it itself could be the one that's causing the problem. This, the fact that the word is there, so that means it's immediately creating a separation. So we're separate from it, but we're not. We are nature, we're animals. Anyway, so that's the, yeah, it's hard to do it in a nutshell. I should probably stop talking.
Well, it's really fascinating because there are a couple of occasions when I'm losing thread of what it is I'm trying to say. And I know that it's incredibly hard for you to articulate what you're trying to say. And it is partly because this thing, I mean, I called the book Women on Nature in the end, this book, because I couldn't think of any better words to describe the two things that I wished to bring together, although I actually find both of them not to be adequate. And who was it in True Detective, that American series? One of the characters says, when you name something, you distance yourself from it. And so while there has been a great movement to name things in the natural world, and you mentioned Robert McFarlane and the Elizabeth Rose mentioned the books that have been, the words that have been taken out of the OED, and Chrissy Gittins and Jackie Morris and Robert McFarlane have all done work to try and reinstate those words like foxglove and otter and magpie that were vanishing. But then there is also another way of, there's the way of silence. You were talking about deep history, Sinead, and that sense of those early church mothers and fathers who lived by themselves and, in absolute silence, and not naming something also enables you to try to perceive it. And I think with the tree alphabet, it is extraordinary because it's a different language that has an emotional resonance, which is clearly not the same as the value of those words, which brings me to Jessica. I think we have to talk about Jess about this. Do you want to unmute yourself? Because I think I'm dying to know, how did this collaboration come about then? Were you one of the original writers in this collection with Katie?
Well, yes, I was actually the Carlow writer in residence last year at the beginning of the year, and managed to get a couple of months in before lockdown happened. But one of my plans had been to try and collaborate in some way with Visual, the wonderful gallery based in Carlow, and myself and Emma Lucy O'Brien had been chatting about different collaborations, and she said, well, look, we've got this exhibition coming in by the wonderful Katie Holten. And I'd been aware of Katie's work previously, and aware of her New York tree alphabet. So we were commissioned by the Visual to collaborate on a little poem that was sent out to frontline workers and various people in the Carlow region during the first lockdown last year. But then the collaboration kind of grew to this other collaboration that took place on Culture Night in September of last year, which was this wonderful kind of multimedia project in response to Katie's beautiful exhibition, which by then was in the space. We could actually go to the space, masks on, and kind of experience the tree alphabet, and watch other people interact with it as well, which was really lovely. So during that whole process, I had sent Katie a number of different poems, things that were in process, things that were kind of half written, and she translated them into the alphabet. And the one that's actually found its way into Women on Nature is from a series of poems that's coming out of my next collection called On Poisons, which is a sequence of poems in the voices of various different poisonous plants. And in the case of the one that I'm going to read now in a minute, an apple seed, which won't kill you, but they're not a good idea to eat. It's not a good idea to eat them. And this series actually came from, I suppose, my anxieties around becoming a new mother in the last couple of years. My next collection is going to be very much themed around postnatal depression in its many kind of forms and its many ways of affecting your thinking. So the notion of these poisons is kind of looking at the darker side of nature and the dangers of nature, but really very much through the lens of a hyper anxious mother, in a sense. And I had a little bit of fun kind of thinking about, if I personified these different aspects of nature, who would they be, and how might they speak? And really in a way that was attempting to reflect less on nature, which is not immoral, it's amoral. It doesn't think in the way that we do, but reflecting more back on the kind of individuals that, a loved child might come across in future, or the kinds of challenges they might face. But before I read this tiny little poem, I'd just like to say a little bit about working with Katie on it, because it was lovely. This was one of the ones we were looking at maybe printing up as a poster. I think there was a thought it might go in a tote bag or something like that. So we were looking at tiny little fragments. And the poem actually ended up being really shaped by the process of Katie's designing it in the tree alphabet, because the use of the particular font, it doesn't allow you any extra space. You know, the beautiful tree figures need space to breathe on the page, so your words need space to breathe on the page. So having that visual input for me was a real revelation as a writer, because yes, we think about how words look on the page, and poets think that way too, but this process brought it to a whole new level, and it meant that I had to shave off anything that didn't belong in an already quite tiny poem. And I was just delighted to have the opportunity to kind of undergo that process. It was like a beautiful visual edit of the work. So I'll just read the poem now. Appleseed. Bite the core to find my black eyes. If you swallow me, a root will take hold in your gut, sprout a trunk to burst from your mouth. With your last breath, a shower of petals on the breeze. So just a really short little, slightly menacing piece there.
But absolutely beautiful. And I'm just going to see if I can find the page in the book. Oh, here we are. I'll hold it up. I don't know.
See if you can. I have it on my
You
Kindle.
put it there. Yeah, fine. Let's have a look at it there.
So you can see how beautiful Katie has made it look.
Yes, it is absolutely exquisite. It's lovely. And it does reduce everything down to, it is almost like a cipher. And so the language is working at almost a sort of slightly subliminal level.
Yes, yeah, and I love the notion that you could in a way you could actually plant that poem. You know, you could go out and find a space and plant those trees in that order, and that poem would become a visible cipher, as you say, on the earth.
There's a big 30-year installation project for something. I don't know if it's. I'm not that au fait with Zoom, but I wonder what'll happen if we sort of all unmute ourselves and just attempt to converse with each other. Is there anything that anybody wants to sort of jump in on? And I'm trying to unmute yourself.
One thing, I'm sorry, I was trying to throw in way too much information in a short amount of time, but I guess the alphabet, the first tree alphabet really came out of a frustration, a sense of, you know, we're in this emergency situation and I could be out in the street screaming, but nobody's listening. And what is language anyway? And the fact that words are all, like the fact that nature is problematic and green and landscape, and a lot of words that we use in art history as well. And so it was this frustration that I had with language, and maybe because I am a frustrated writer, I wanted to write it, but I can't write. And so this, Jay Griffiths has been writing a lot, and she's published this book, Why Rebel? So anyway, I just wanted to say that there was that element, and then Kate, I also didn't get into the ogham either, but obviously really embedded with, you know, being Irish is you grow up, you mightn't be taught ogham in school. I was never actually officially taught it, but it's inside, you know, my cells all have memory of this, whatever it was, this mysterious 5th century, what they call a tree alphabet. Supposedly each letter of the alphabet came from trees, and it was scratched on trees, and it was a mark-making way. And humans, that's what makes us different, right, from these other animals. Other animals can communicate, and trees can communicate, and plants can communicate, but we have this way of making marks and storytelling and doing what we're doing now. And I think that's, hopefully we can use it, because I think the situation that we're in right now is so dire, right? We only have a few years left to try and deal with the emergency, and it's stories that are going to get us out of this. So trying to create new stories and share stories and go back to old forgotten stories, the Indigenous stories. So I will stop talking again. I just wanted to mention my frustration.
Yeah, no, well, I understand the frustration. I too share the frustration. I mean, this is partly why I've edited an anthology, because I find I want to spend so much time in silence, not using language. But, you know, it's so exciting to have the words and images of all of you. Thank you so much for being part of this lovely book. Because I find myself just stumbling into silence and thinking, there's so much noise, there's so much going on. And, you know, again, Sinead, going back to that piece that you wrote, it's now 5 years ago. Can you believe it's 5 years ago, the 2016 referendum? I mean, how do you feel about that now, 6 years later?
I think still quite grim, you know. I mean, the umbilical connection between Ireland and Britain is, you know, it's a very close and very familial one. There's been a lot of love there. There's also been a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, an awful lot of conflict, and Brexit seemed to bring all that up again. I you know, I never heard the word border as much as I did in my life in the year 2016, and you know, borders are like wounds down the landscape in many ways. And in Ireland, if you go to certain parts of Northern Ireland, the word border is a very triggering word for people. And I found that I was thinking about history an awful lot, and I was thinking about that separation and the idea that you kept hearing about Britain as the only place with a land border with Ireland, and yet it's across the water. It's a really complex geographical thing to look at on a map, and, you know, trying to explain to my children, like, why does we use different money when we go across the border and stuff. So it's a really strange and complex, and that's just for me in the south. I can't imagine what it's like if you live in the 6 counties in Northern Ireland. So yeah, I feel but also I wrote there's a tiny moment in that essay where I encountered a woman who was British at the dock, and I was getting the bus back, and I was like, you know, you're not watching the news, how are you doing? And she was like, no. And I was like, what about your passport? And she was like, what of it? So some people, I think I cared about it more than some people I encountered, but it was very divisive. I can imagine it was very divisive for you, Catherine, and people that Elizabeth Rose would know in the UK as well. But yeah, time is a very strange and circular thing in many ways, isn't it? The last year, I don't know where I am. I keep forgetting it's 2021, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I guess the pandemic got in the way. But when I was, again, trying to work out how to describe this book, I have called it the East Atlantic Archipelago, because I just thought, I can't get in. I'm so overwhelmed by the geopolitics and, as you say, these scars on the land. And Elizabeth Rose, I don't know whether you can, do you have leave to remain in the Republic of Ireland? With your British passport? It's,
I think
but everything has become.
We won't tell them where you live, Elizabeth.
I'm just gonna hide in West Cork, you know.
Yeah, I think West Cork won one war against British incursions anyway, so I think you'll probably win another.
Yeah, I only open my mouth to change feet. Sorry about that. Are there any questions here? Emma, should we see if there's anybody out there? And has anybody asked any questions? Where shall I find them? Q&A, is that? Oh, no open questions. There we are. Only hosts and panelists can see the questions. Does anybody want to ask any questions out there in our participants?
It must be easier in the room. You've got to put up your hand, and there's always, like, you know, it's like I'm Spartacus. Someone takes ages, and then all the hands go up. So this way, you're all anonymous, and it's much easier.
I've just looked at Emma said, "Oops, I forgot to mention the Q&A box."
But then she did put it in that. So yeah. But while people are coming up with questions, and we can keep an eye on that. I like that. It was interesting to me how so many people talked about frustration, you know, and their projects came from a frustration of some type. You know, my own came from 2 frustrations. One was never being able to, you know, I spent my entire life trying to be in nature as much and in books as much, the 2 places that, you know, gave me respite and joy and all, you know, and freedom, trying to understand why my family was how it was. You know, and then I came to a realization that actually, you know, I just had to accept it. I was never going to understand it. But the frustration of not being able to write about it, you know, and never having books that represented my world, you know, like that's partly why I write children's fiction, is to try and have a wider range of voices represented. Because I know that you were saying, Kate, in an interview, or I think it's in the foreword of the book as well, that, you know, the frustration of all nature writing being from men, and not just men, but men from the south of England as well. You know, so there was the frustration of never having a voice represented, but also not being able to write. And I had to look to nature, because that was the one place where in my entire life, you know, I actually felt like I belonged, you know. So I've always had this real interest in how I never see people as separate from nature. I see us as part of nature, you know, and I see nature as stronger. You know, we'll disappear if we continue in the way that we are, but the planet will continue in a different way, but it's ourselves that will be wiped out, you know. So I always had this, I always felt like being in nature was a place of truth and a place of integrity for me. And it took me a long time to realize I needed 2 things to happen. I needed 1, my mother to die, and 2, for me to realize that nature was my springboard to be able to, you know, go into these places. So it was, you know, again, a different type of frustration, but coming from very similar places, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, much has been written about solace and grief and the natural world, but there is something fundamental about death that, you know, we are finite, we drift and go, but actually the natural world just keeps on renewing itself around us, and maybe it's on different time frames, either longer or shorter, be it a tree or a snail. And I think we're able to contextualize ourselves when we step outside. And also, again, thinking of these geopolitical scars on the land, as we've all crept into our more insular, well, you know, nation states, for me, there's a huge anxiety in that, because what we actually need to do is come together globally to save, you know, if the planet is to have a fighting chance, it actually needs massive cooperation, not the reverse of cooperation. So I don't know, how do we feel? Is that going to help what are our feelings on that?
Yeah, I think it is one of the worries, to bring it again back to Brexit, the notion that, you know, the EU is very much far from perfect, but there are certain standards in place around even things like, you know, pesticides and food production and things like that, which have had a positive impact environmentally. Now, it's not enough. We know it's not enough, and it needs to be stepped up. But the notion of the fragmentation of that is quite frightening, because if you look at the kind of environmental catastrophes that seem to be unfolding constantly in the States, around things like pipelines through native lands, and, you know, just lead in the water, industrial agriculture on a scale that would be unheard of here in Europe. You know, it doesn't look like there's a brighter place out there than in the EU necessarily, in terms of considering the environment, you know. And one of the things that really struck me in the book, Kate, I'm about halfway through the anthology now, I've been reading it kind of chronologically and so enjoying it, was something that I hadn't considered, which was the deep connection with agriculture, which is something that as a city dweller, I have a terrible habit of kind of dismissing as you know, a massive contributor to eco crisis, which it is in some ways. And we have a huge problem with emissions and overgrazing in Ireland. I know there's similar issues in the UK, but there was something there in that relationship with the land, which I was ashamed to say that I had kind of discounted and not been aware of. And some of the most moving pieces that I found so far in the anthology were the ones that engaged with that, kind of the husbandry of the land, the connection through agriculture, the love of livestock, the connection with livestock, that wonderful kind of empathy between farmer and beast. And that kind of gave me some hope that I didn't expect to find from an agricultural source, you know, towards a kind of a new sensitivity of, you know, farming relationships with the land, rather than feeling like we just have to kind of obliterate all farming and go back to some sort of imagined mystical Stone Age.
Well, I think that's really interesting. Thank you for saying that, because I've felt often as being a member of an audience at an event where conservationists and naturalists are talking, and it's very easy to get this impression, or geologists, that nature is all of those things, but actually the people who are mostly on the land and are working the land are farmers. And there's this great sort of division, certainly in Britain, between conservationists and farmers, almost as if the conservationists are the police and the farmers are the, you know, it's something that I found extraordinarily frustrating. Certainly, you know, there are farmers who have taken a rewilding route, but there are many farmers who are left looking out and thinking, well, where do I fit into this? And feeling, you know, my conversations with Welsh sheep farmers, feeling that they're being told what to do or talked at by conservationists, and there's a great sort of chasm and wound there. That I know I was quite keen to have the voices of women farmers within the anthology, because it does show you, apart from anything else, just how difficult, you know, the extraordinary graft of being outside in the cold, in the snow, or that knuckle biting cold that is actually what agriculture is, and you can't divorce one from the other, the land of the people and the people of the land. So yes, I suppose it's a search for a more holistic vision.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now I'm looking at our clock. We've got no one's asking us any questions. I think there must be a great terror here. There's a Q&A. Let's have a look. Oh, Joe Sweeting, so good to hear you all conversing. Congratulations on this beautiful collaborative collection. Where there are words and discourse, there is hope. Bravo all. That's fantastic. Thank you, Joe. Thank you for your huge support. There are lovely images by Joe in this book. Susan Rady Klein, Anna Pavard's book, The Naming of Plants, does not contain one reference to women or incorporation of the feminine in the naming. That's really interesting. I didn't know that. But I'm not at all surprised, funnily enough. You know, women have been so, what's been really interesting about simply missing the men out, it's not as if you have to sort of say, what is a female voice, what is a woman, what do we think, what do we see? Just by taking that out, a completely different way of looking that has been throughout the whole collection, united by a holistic sense, not differentiating between people and places. Interestingly, I don't think there's a single misanthrope in there, to my knowledge. Oh, we've got some questions. No, they're just thanking us all and saying that they're enjoying it. So I suppose if no one's got any other questions, none of you, have you got any questions? I'm going to just say thank you so much to all of you. I really loved it. I have found it slightly discombobulating, I admit, to all of you who are watching. I apologize. I'd be much happier with a glass of probably wine in my hand on stage in an auditorium with real people so that we could look at you. But Emma, thank you so much for inviting us all to the West Cork Literary Festival. It's been fantastic, and I just wish we could all now go out and get something to eat afterwards. But,
exactly.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you to all the people who we can't see, which is so frustrating, who I know are there. Thank you for coming.
And thank you to all of you, and thanks for all the lovely comments that are coming in there now. It was an absolute pleasure to listen to it and to hear you all speak. And I'm not sure apologies if you mentioned this when you were speaking, Katie. Am I correct in thinking that the Irish Tree alphabet has recently been acquired by the Crawford Gallery in Cork City as part of our national collection?
Yeah.
So the
Thanks,
installation
Emer.
that was originally.
As you can tell, I'm not very good at doing short.
No, I just think I was very impressed when I saw that during the week. I thought it was really exciting because I love the idea of the Irish Tree alphabet and the idea that, you know, that it now belongs to the national collection. And obviously I'm completely biased because it's in Cork. And the idea of actually being able to go and see it is really exciting to me.
Yeah. That's the whole point of the project, was just to create something that you can give, right? It's not mine, it's everyone's, so you can download the font, you can write with it, like Jessica was able to create her incredible poems, and you can send them back to me if you'd like, or the Crawford, but we do have plans, like even Emma at the visual, we do hope to eventually plant people's messages, so people have been sending us their words, their dreams, and they're like little living time capsules. And I think I did want to mention I tried on my screen sharing, but I couldn't get the video to work properly. I tried to make an explorer's guide. So hopefully there will be one day an explorer's guide to the A to Z. So I started making it for visual. We thought it would be like a 2-page flyer pamphlet that we could give out to schools, but it turned into a 60-page, not a monster, a friendly monster. And Elizabeth Rose, what you were saying about, you know, education and learning, for me, this really feels like it just is the next step. That's what my work is now. I'm actually, all of the projects I'm working on now have the same title, Learning to be Better Lovers. So I heard somebody say this once, we have to learn to be better lovers of the earth. And I think planting the word love, this was Emma Lucy's idea, LOVE, those 4 trees, we could give out tree bundles. So you could share tree bundles. And here I'm doing a project in Staten Island using the New York City tree alphabet, although it's complicated because people can't plant trees. Most people don't have enough space. So working with the Native Plant Center, they had this great idea of maybe I need to make a whole new wildflower alphabet. And then we can just have seeds that we can share. So we'll share seeds, people can plant love or whatever words they'd like.
Well, I was very conscious in choosing the Appleseed poem of, you know, the relationship between the apple, the seed, Eve, knowledge, the first woman, la prima donna, and, you know, taking that bite out of the apple, and that marvelous gesture of offering it, you know, not turning it into a sort of capitalist venture, or not exploiting, but actually just taking the earth and living from it. And thank you, Eve, for taking the apple off the tree. And thank you, for, Jess, for that exquisite, tiny seed that has got so much power in it. It all comes from there.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Jess, you didn't mention that you sang.
Oh yes, yeah, we yes, and mad lockdown ideas. I've spent a long time in my life singing in choirs, but haven't been able to for the past few years for a number of different reasons. Just life gets in the way. But I actually the poems that I wrote in response to Katie's exhibition, I collaborated with a wonderful composer called Tom Lane, who's a theatre and a choral composer, and I'd worked with him while I worked in the Abbey Theatre for a long time. We'd worked there together. So he set the little poems to music and I sang them, recorded them inside a cardboard box in my bedroom, the quietest room in the house, with a €15 microphone bought off the internet, and they provided the kind of accompaniment to the Culture Night piece, which I think you can still see on Visual Carlo's YouTube channel. So if you suddenly find yourself surrounded with choral music, that's me. That's lots of my voice.
I should have thought of having it so we could play it. It's really beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It was a fun experiment. I'm waiting for somebody to ask me to do it again.
No, nor I'd have asked you to sing us out.
Oh no, it's okay. I don't have my cardboard box, so we can't.
That's one for the pub, right?
Yes, absolutely. Oh God, yeah, get me doing my choral soprano singing. That's the way to get a table in a pub, actually, because I'll clear people out of there. The glasses will start smashing. It'll be brilliant.
Now that the pubs have reopened.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, hopefully the next time we're doing this, we'll all be down in Ma Murphy's in Bantry. So thank you again to all of you. That was absolutely marvelous. Thanks to our audience for tuning in. Thank you to Katharine for putting this brilliant anthology together. And to Elizabeth Rose Murray, Katie Holton, Sinead Gleason and Jessica Traynor for being here with us tonight. This is being recorded, and all going well, basically meaning that I did actually press record. It should be on our YouTube channel sometime next week, but we'll put it on social media anyway when it is available. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and hopefully see you all in person before too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Emer. Thank you, Katharine. Thanks, everyone. Good luck.
Thanks.
Bye.